computer. You all say yes, let me know. We're good? Cool.
For me.
So to anyone listening, thank you for listening. This is MSWA's Tough Talks. It's an interview series we're doing with faculty and staff. The aims are one, to kind of get to know the actual people in the department. So much of our interactions are us like speculating on your background based on what you mentioned in class. I know Dr. Capp has something to do with schools and climate, and at some point was likely a teacher, but it's all like context clues. And the other goal is to kind of encourage curiosity so that we can have conversations about the field and research outside of outcome-oriented assignments and classes. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself. It feels weird to talk to an audience. I'm still getting used to it. I'm Chris. I'm a graduating student. I was the president during the 2023-2024 academic year, which I have to frame it that way now because it's going to be over in a couple of days. And I'll let the other interviewers introduce themselves. Kevin Vale.
Okay. I'm Vale. I'm a current MSW student. I'm in the full-time program for next year's class of 2025. And I will be the MSWA Vice President for the 24-25 school year.
My name's Gavin. I am also graduating in a short while here at class of 2024, and I have been your events coordinator with the MSWA board.
And Dr. Capp, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little blurb about you?
Sure. I'm Gordon Capp. I'm an associate professor in the social work department. This is my 6th year here in this department.
Awesome. I guess first question, as I alluded to, we don't really know your backgrounds except for maybe we read a faculty bio during interviews, likely not. Do you want to just give us a little bit of information about your background and your research interests and what led you there?
Sure, yeah. I started out in elementary education, so your guess was correct. Context clues worked. So I was originally trained as a teacher. My undergrad degree is language arts and elementary ed. And so I taught elementary for a little bit, and then I taught middle school for a few years. And so that was actually my favorite. I really liked middle school. I taught middle school English. And I loved it. It was great. So yeah, that's where I started. So when I was teaching English, it was 6th graders, was the first year of middle school in Colorado where I was. And I kind of found that I didn't actually care if folks did their English homework. And I was much more interested in some of the other things that were happening in their lives. And so that was sort of my first clue that I should maybe think about doing something else. So I wanted to stay connected to kids. I wanted to stay connected to schools. And I wanted to, I'm not sure I quite knew this yet, but I wanted to stay connected to mental health as well. And so I did the perusal of related degrees and ended up in social work. And then so I moved to California in 2003, and then did my MSW at Long Beach. This program didn't exist yet, so that's why. And worked in community mental health for about 7 years before I went back for my PhD. So that's kind of the background. I guess, do you want me to answer the research interest part of that? So part of what I tried to do when I started my PhD was keep connections to schools and to mental health. I've been a therapist. I've been working a lot with mostly kids and families, and I've been working a lot in school settings. And so that was kind of my goal when I started my PhD, was to maintain some kind of connection between mental health and school settings as I went forward. And so mostly that's been true. Yeah.
I guess first question after the initial question. You worked community mental health, and I like the pivot makes sense of you're working with children and not super caring about the academic side as much as everything else going on. But I think that pivot is really intuitive to me. But then to go back to research after working in the field it should be more intuitive, but it's somehow less intuitive. So you want to could you speak to like how you made that decision and took that leap?
I kind of knew that I wanted to be still involved in education in some way. And one of the things I started doing while I was in practice is I started teaching part-time. So I actually started teaching part-time here at Fullerton in the School of Ed. And I really liked that. And so that was kind of also a clue that like it was just sort of for me, right? Like I was enjoying this experience and I wanted that to be more of my work. And I had thought, I don't know, I think early on at some point I'd sort of thought like it'd be cool to train social workers and to be in a place where I could do that kind of work. I think I don't know, in some ways, I don't know how you know if you're ready for that. So I'm not sure that I thought I was necessarily ready. Like, oh, I've gained this much X amount of clinical experience and now I can train social workers. But I knew that I liked being in the classroom. I knew that I liked working with students, and I knew that I wanted to be connected to social work. And so that was part of the pivot to the PhD. And then the research, almost not entirely, but that was, like that's a little bit of a requirement. Like you can't get a tenure track job really without the PhD. So you have to do that. Like you can't be a social worker without the MSW. So that was part of the motivation. The research side of it, I had honestly thought less about. Like I thought about it, but it wasn't necessarily the primary driver for me. Like I was much more interested in like, how do I get to this next place that I want to go? And I don't know, I was pretty open to the experience in terms of going back to school. So I'm trying to think about what I was thinking X number of years ago. I'm not sure I really remember. But yeah, and so I was pretty like, I didn't know that much about research, certainly about conducting research when I started my PhD. So I just walked in and I found my mentor, Ron, and he was doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I just sort of, you get thrown in. And so I started working with him, and that's how it went.
Yeah, it's a weird contrast because we just talked to Dr. E, and she was like, I love research. I couldn't wait to go back. And yours sounds more like I had no idea what it was, and I could tolerate it while I was on this route to the PhD.
Yeah.
Working backwards almost.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of true. I didn't really have a crystal clear sense of what I was walking into in terms of the research and what that was all gonna look like. And when I got there and started doing it, it was okay. And I like it. And it's an important part of what I do, and I want to keep doing it. But no, it wasn't like, I wasn't quite like that. I wasn't like, I'm ready to do research. I'm going back to PhD school.
It sounds like more the goal of teaching and helping to form new social workers was more in the fore, driving you towards a PhD program. Is that what you?
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. I kind of found myself, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I felt like I was kind of at a crossroads in my clinic. Like I was at this organization and I just really didn't want to do it anymore. I really wanted to do something else. And so I kind of felt like I was at like a fork in the road. And so I was either going to have to do something else different clinically, or I was going to get accepted into school to go back. And so I got accepted. And so I like school, so I went back.
Do you recall at all what your relationship to the world of research or consuming research was like as an MSW student?
I was working in some school-based programs. And so one of the things I was doing was like, our agency had this weird bully prevention. I shouldn't say that. It was a bully prevention program that was an outreach kind of program for us. So we went into schools and we talked with folks about bully prevention. And that, I think that was really like, I started reading a lot about bully prevention and school violence and whole school intervention, and school-based mental health. And so those were, that was the first sort of area of research that I was really consuming as a practitioner.
So you started your relationship with like consuming research and making sense of it started with practical, like living the practical elements of it, and then reading things that were related to what you were experiencing already.
Yeah, and reading things, I was trying to redo things, or I was trying to change how we were doing things. And so I wanted to have a better idea of what we were trying to accomplish and what we should be trying to accomplish, or how we might accomplish that. So I think those are kind of the questions maybe I was interested in.
Cool. I was curious about that because I think you know, I don't know that social workers go for an MSW, into their MSW research is the thing they have to tolerate to get the degree to go into clinical work a lot of times. And it's just interesting to hear you say that there was a sort of a practical application at the entry point of that. I think that makes helps research come alive for people if they can join the pragmatic, practical experience they're having with what they're reading on the page. There's less of a gap to cover in terms of getting the academic jargon or the structure of the papers, to make sense to them is sort of what's clarifying for me in the mind.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable sort of description of what I was experiencing. Yeah.
Could you
I want to leave space for some. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was like, could you speak to like in your program, like what was like the actual research that you were doing? I have read your faculty bio, so I know it broadly relates to like school climate. I remember you talking about school within the context of its like, surrounding. I'm butchering your research, but so I was hoping like if you could describe like the actual weeds of your research, and then like if we were to understand like what applications would look like if like, we read your dissertation and try to do something like what that looks like.
So I feel like you asked a slightly different question at the beginning about what I started doing when I started my PhD, or like the weeds of my research.
I guess like what was your actual research besides like knowing it's school climate? Like if you could just go into more detail.
Yeah. So I was really interested, I still am, in the idea of school climate, which is kind of like how like you walk in the doors of a school and we tend to get a pretty quick feeling about what kind of place we're in. Is this a place I want to hang out? Is this a place I want my kids to be? We get a pretty quick kind of sort of gut feeling about that, I think, when we walk into schools. And so that's what I was interested in. And part of that came from teaching middle school. Like my middle school in Colorado was a fantastic place. I really liked working there. So I feel like in some ways I did a good job by leaving when I liked the job to go do something else. Like I didn't start hating teaching and I was like, I'm out of here. This is awful. So I really liked it. And I really feel like the school where I was teaching was a good place. And like our climate was really positive. So, and climate, it's kind of like a puzzle. Like if you were going to take 4 pieces of a puzzle to put together and make school climate, you'd take like safety, and that's like physical safety and emotional safety. And you'd take activities around teaching and learning. So with the actual like sort of business of a school, you'd take some organizational components, and you'd take like relationships with other people. And what has always struck me about climate is that you can't choose which of those you're going to experience. If you walk into a school and you're a kid, you can't say, today I'm only going to have relationships with the teachers who like me, and I'm going to ignore the rest of the day, right? You can't pull it apart. It's all intertwined. And so what I started working on was research around like, how do we make schools more welcoming, and how do we think about like, are there groups of students that have sort of different experiences with school climate, even within the same school? We have that. That's what happens. And so that's kind of what I started thinking about and working on. And then what I realized is that people weren't really talking about staff members. And so here we have this ideal that if you have a real positive school climate, you have all these things that go with it. You have better you have better social emotional outcomes, you have better academic outcomes, you have less violence, you have less substance use, you have less mental health problems, you have less like school to prison pipeline that gets better when you have positive school climate. So my issue kind of came down to, so this is all student centered. What about the staff members? And here's where my first, like, one of the first, I don't know if it's a speed bump or whatever it is, but I think we have an assumption that staff members are creating climate for kids. Like, whose job is it to make it a good school and make it a positive place? And I think the responsibility sort of naturally falls on staff, but we haven't really spent a lot of time talking to staff about what their experiences are. What if you're a teacher at a school and you think everything is awful and you hate the people you work with and your principal's a jerk and the building's falling apart and like it's a terrible neighborhood? Like, that's not a place that's going to be super nice to go to work. Are you going to be able to create an environment for students where they feel like, yeah, this place is safe and it's welcoming and I'm going to do great here, and etc. Right? So that's where it all, I guess that's kind of the weeds of where it started. So my dissertation was taking existing data from California and doing some quantitative study. I don't know how geeky you want to get. Like, I did a really cool thing with latent class analysis where we take groups of people and we take predictor variables and we create profiles. So if I've got, I don't know, if I've got X number of variables assessing safety and relationships and teaching and learning, I'm going to have teachers that kind of fall into different profiles. So one profile is really positive, teachers who feel like everything is fantastic. And one profile is negative, where people feel like everything is awful. So you can kind of think what it's like to be a teacher who thinks everything is fabulous where you go to work, and a teacher where everything is awful where you go to work. So part of my dissertation was then to find schools where people in those profiles were. So I looked for schools where there were lots of people in the positive profile at the school, and I looked for schools where there were lots of people in the negative profile at the school, and then I went to those schools. And I hung out for like 6 months. I went to staff meetings and wandered the hallways and talked to principals and talked to teachers and did the whole thing. I feel like I'm missing half the question, but yeah.
Well, I think you colored the picture of it. So then at the end of that, what would you synthesize? This might be a challenging question, but how would you synthesize like what you found, or were you surprised by anything that you found after having gone in and sat in those places?
One thing that stood out to me was that there are places where people are experiencing positive and negative school environments, like together. So they're in the same place, they're in the same schools, they're in the same districts. So it's not just that one school is all good or all bad. It's that people are experiencing the environment in slightly different ways depending on who they are. So that's one thing that I think is meaningful and important to understand from an intervention perspective. Like, if you are a school social worker in a building and you're trying to support staff, like, you need to be ready for the fact that not everybody is in the same place. And so how are you going to do that meaningfully? The case study experience of going to the places is super fun. Like, that was really cool. So that's not an outcome or applicable to anyone, but it's super fun. One of the things that I noticed, like, the principal and leadership is critical, and that's not necessarily a surprise, but principals had a lot to do with the kinds of climate that staff members and teachers were experiencing. And so that was super interesting. And I think, and like that continues to be something that we see around like mental health implementation kind of stuff. Like, there are principals. I did some work in Garden Grove a couple of years ago and was trying to help them sort of evaluate their mental health staffing system that they created. And there are some principals that totally get why you want mental health supports on your campus, and they want to like have they want to do everything to make that system successful. And some principals who seem like they don't, I don't want to trash talk principals, right? But they're not on the same page. They understand it differently. It's not the same kind of priority to them. And they don't have the same level of fluency with it. We don't train principals to be mental health like people. So we have to sort of start with that. But that leadership and how people set things up is a lot of how we're successful in schools and connecting mental health outcomes or mental health interventions. So I think that's one of the, for me, that's one of the other things that just sort of continues to be present. And as we think about how interventions are designed and how they're implemented, this is one of the things that we continue to see. Like, we continue to see interventions that get rolled out and a school tries to adopt it, and then it doesn't last because the principal changed, or the principal doesn't want to do it, or they didn't train all the people, or teachers left, or whatever it is. So it tends to be a kind of high turnover environment in terms of interventions.
On the note of, like, I guess, leadership in school climate, like, what effectively influences that? Like, how do you get someone on the same page? If you can, I don't know.
That's a good question. That's one of my, that's kind of on the list for one of the things that I want to do next, is spend more time thinking about principals and thinking about where they're coming from, and thinking about how you generate a pro mental health services principal, for lack of a better word, a PMHP. And so, yeah, what I feel like my experience has been like a lot of, like, I don't know, when I walk in and talk to principals, it doesn't take very long. Like, it's super interesting. I love talking to principals, but it doesn't take very long to get a sense of where they are. Like, you understand mental health, you understand mental health services, and you really want to push this. You are accepting of it. It's like not on your priority list. I don't know. I feel like I get a sense pretty quickly of where folks are, but so far I felt like it just is a luck of the draw. Like, I showed up and this is who they were. So I think that's one of the questions that I have. Like, how do you develop? I don't know. I think I need to go talk to the people who are PMHPs and, like, ask them questions like, where did this come up for you? How did you decide this was a priority? Was it training? Was it experience? Did something work and so you adopted it? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like an aim for future research. I guess this bridging of gaps may not go super well, but I guess one thing that comes to mind for me is that, you've talked about, like, training social workers. You're obviously a professor here. Like, how do you bring this emphasis on school climate to you right now as a professor? Because I think all of us here have some investment in school climate. That's why the three of us are probably involved in this organization versus choosing not to be. And I think there's a constant, at least, consideration on my end of, like, from the top down, if you want to consider me quote unquote leadership, like, how do you positively influence the climate that you exist in? So I wanted to ask, like, how you view it as a current faculty member.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think because there are a lot of weird variables in academia. I feel like the sort of independent nature of faculty and what we do is a little bit of I don't know, it sort of means we're separated a little bit in some ways from the organization, I guess, because maybe in social work we're a little bit different, partly because of accreditation. I think that I think it's really what people want to prioritize and whether or not they think it's important. And I think that because we have some interesting levels of organization. We have, like, a university level, which in some ways is the last to impact me as an individual faculty member and maybe even you as individual students. And then we have the college, and then we have the department. The department is clearly the most important influence on what I would describe as like our climate that we all experience. And we all experience the same climate. We just experience it kind of in different ways from different places. It's probably a lot connected to our roles. So for me, I think that my sense of climate is like, I can tie it sort of back to the big pieces. Like, do we feel like this is a safe place? I mean, I think like physically, like we're pretty safe here on campus. I don't ever really feel like my physical safety is compromised. Are we emotionally safe? I think is a really different question. And that maybe is where there's a lot of variation. Like it probably depends a lot on who you are, how emotionally safe you feel. And that's also connected to like what kind of support you get. So like I have some really supportive colleagues, and that's a really important part of my experience. Like if I didn't have people that I was close to and I felt like we're like there and like I have a question, I'm struggling, like do I have people that can respond to those things? I think that has a lot to do with it.
When
I
you
feel like
think
I'm drifting dramatically from the question. Anyway, yeah, Gavin.
I'm resonating with your answers for sure. As you think of like the classroom settings that you cultivate, like when you teach here, do you have like an ideal vision for what, I mean, like you said, every individual experiences a climate, a classroom, and anything differently. Do you have a vision for what your hope is that students, what it feels like for a student to be in one of your classes?
Yeah. But if I say that out loud and it's not how it is in class, I'm going to be really exposed. Yeah, I do. I mean, like, I hope that people feel like it's okay to take risks and feel like it's okay to make mistakes. And I hope they feel like I want people to feel like it's okay to like say things that aren't fully formed and to think out loud. Um, and that it like it's okay for us to do that. I also mean like I don't know. There's a power differential in class because I'm the professor and y'all are the students. But I also feel like the more moments we can have where we're like it's more of an egalitarian experience, the better that is. And so I hope that those moments exist. I don't think that it's going to be all the moments. Maybe it doesn't even have to be all the moments, but I hope that those moments are there and sort of predictable. Like we know we're going to have them. So those, I don't know, those are some of the things.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see where this
Speaking of
we'll see
not
what
fully
comes out of my
formed.
mouth next. Yeah, we'll model the not fully formed question. The things that just pinged in my head when you said that is like what does it look like when someone in a classroom when someone lets out a thought that's not fully formed? And because I think from my experience as a student, I carry around a lot of like perfectionist tendencies within me. So I always want my thoughts to be fully formed when I say them. So I've got that uphill, battle to walk up. Chris covers his mouth in shock. But then I think also like something that's not completely unique, but distinct among the social work field, I think, is that there's a very palpable orthodoxy of thought in social work in some ways. Sometimes I think. I'm curious if that resonates with you or because I think like something I've talked about briefly in other conversations is, social work is a pretty progressive field, politically speaking. What would it feel like or be like to be a person of a different, manner of thinking in our classes? Or if you're just still working out some of the ways to understand things that, for the most part, we collectively or the social work field has already arrived at conclusions about, how do you bridge the gap for someone who's working on it? Because you don't want to say, oh yeah, you can work through this process, but here's the destination you're ultimately going to get to anyway. Feels antithetical to a organic process of letting them work through it. But at the same time, that is the conclusion that, you know, I feel like I'm talking in too much abstractions, and I'm going to stop now and see if you've got anything to respond with.
I think we all have to, I think one of the things I like about a social work program is that we all are hopefully confronted with things that make us uncomfortable or that make us uneasy or that make us question something about ourselves. I think that the nature of confronting things like identity and diversity and the vulnerability of clinical interactions means that, like, that's, I hope that those things push us. I remember that. I remember getting pushed when I did my MSW. And so I think that's really good. I hope that happens. And so I guess that's one thing that I was thinking. The other thing is that, I don't know, Dr. Lozano said this really well. We have a method of helping that is tested over time, like in social work. So, and a lot of it is rooted in our code of ethics and how that guides the treatment of people, and how it requires us to approach other people. And I think that, to me, that's the kind of that's the end point that you're kind of talking about, that they're going to get to. Is it okay if I don't agree with all of those ethical principles in my personal life, as long as I practice them? Probably. But I bet that's really hard to be that way. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the orthodoxy that you are mentioning. But it's also the thing that I think is this thought is not fully formed. We need those things to anchor how we're going to treat people and how we're going to interact with people. And it's we have to let people make their own decisions. We have to accept those decisions, and then we have to try to help them the best that we can within their own belief systems, because we can't change those. Yeah, I don't know where this is going. But it I guess it does require something of us to be patient and be really dogged about those ethics in terms of how we respond to others. My take is that we have to respond to other people in a way that's demonstrably caring. You should know that I care about you. And it has nothing to do with whether or not I agree with you politically or whatever elsely. It's just that, yes, it's my job to work with you, but because of what I've chosen to do, these ethical principles are going to guide how I start my relationship with you. And the fundamental part of that is that I'm going to care about you, and what happens to you. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where I started or where we ended up.
Well, I certainly didn't tee you up with a question that could be described as very clear either, so we could put that on me.
I'm mindful that Gavin and I have asked a lot of questions, so I want to make sure we open it up for bail, because I know we've had you as a professor, so it's easy for us to just jump in. Any questions, Vale?
I mean, I guess just because I also am coming from an education background and now I'm transitioning over to the clinical side. And this is so back to original topic off what we were just discussing, but I think the number one thing I've struggled with is switching from educational language to clinical language. Not even just in papers or documentation, but just in day-to-day how I talk in terms of clients, my classmates, in discussions with everyone. Coming from a child development background, it was super human behavior heavy. And so I was just wondering how your transition went from going from straight up teaching in a classroom to then now having a practice and practicing active social work and then transitioning into a professor role as well.
I don't I don't remember. um, I'm not sure I really remember like that particular experience, or like yeah, I don't. Do you have an example of like what is a challenge for you?
And this is obviously just a selfish question because I don't know how many other people this will apply to, because I don't even know how many other people are coming from education. But when I am working with a client, or because I'm placed at a school this year, next year I won't be, but in this current role, I like immediately go more into like that teacher mode of trying to problem solve, and I'm trying to practice more meeting them where they're at versus trying to be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our steps. Here's what's coming next. I'm figuring everything out for you kind of situation. Um, and I'm trying to switch over to more client led and letting them guide our sessions and being comfortable with the silence and not feeling like I need to whip out a whiteboard and start explaining theories to them and everything. Um, so that's
You've
what I
been quiet for
struggle
a
with.
long time. Let me tell you some things.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think that I remember that I remember the like let the client lead kind of ideas being a little bit of a double-edged sword. Like maybe that's the wrong analogy, but like in one sense, it sounds so delightful. Like, oh, I don't have to have a lesson plan. I don't have to know what's coming next. And so my goal is just to listen and to let these people sort of unfold the session in the way that they need to today. So I think part of me really found that to be refreshing, or like that was a really different kind of experience that I was really excited about. But it was also like, I mean, that's not easy. Like those to sit in the silence and to wait for things to happen and to not know where it's going, um, and all of those things that are happening in the moment, and you're feeling like you're supposed to be doing something, and you're feeling like you're supposed to be like coming up with a result by the time we're done. Like there's so there's a lot that gets going in your mind, especially in the moments of silence. And so I don't know. I, I had people that were like, it's okay. My first year field instructor, Terry, was like, it's fine. Silence is fine. Don't worry about it. Let it happen. You don't have to hurry it. I mean, so he did some pretty like direct like reassurances that I wasn't being crazy. And that it was okay to do that, because I think part of me sometimes felt like I'm not really doing anything. Like, is this really what I'm supposed to do? And he was like, yes, this is exactly what you're supposed to do right now. And so I think it took, it definitely was support from others that helped me kind of figure out how to be in those spaces a little bit better. And I say that like as like I was more comfortable in being in those spaces that were quiet or that were undefined. I think, I don't know. I love the crossover from education to social work. I think it has so much value, because especially if you're gonna work with kids, especially if you are gonna work in school settings. And I actually think we talked a little bit about this at the showcase, but it puts you in a really different position in terms of talking with other adults in the school who are the decision makers. And so when you know the language, it really changes your experience as a social worker to be there with a background as an educator. But it also means that when if you work with kids, you will work indirectly with schools in some way, and you will have a way to understand their school experiences, which are always like so prevalent and present in their experiences in the session, or at least that's what my experience was with kids.
Yeah, I think with that, it's also a little bit more applicable to a wider audience of like imposter syndrome with like feeling like we're not doing anything, especially at first year internship. I don't know if that was both of your experiences, but every now and then you just kind of sit back and you're like, what are we doing? What's happening? What's going on? And I feel like that's very reminiscent of like how my field classes have gone this semester as well. Of they're just everyone's just kind of like in a big question mark of we have no idea if it's really doing what it needs to do. And so it's reassuring to hear from someone who's in the field to be like, that's kind of the point. And like, you are doing a lot more than you think you are, which we hear a lot from our field instructors at internship, but I feel like in the school, like in our classroom settings at MSW program, like it just kind of, I don't know, wavers away from that. So it's nice to hear that it does something.
I think it does something. I think it's hard to be, I mean, like we talk about this, but you're doing theory and practice at the same time. And in some ways, that's like a delightfully academic means nothing sentence to say, right? Because people are like, oh yeah, and then they walk away and they're like, what does that mean? That doesn't make any sense. And I don't know, maybe that's sort of the experience too, of sitting there. But I think, I don't know, this is like, it takes some time. Like you need some time to be in a place where there's practice happening, where you're doing some, and you need some time to be in the classroom where you're learning the theoretical components. And they all have to percolate a little bit, or no, that's what I think. I think they have to percolate a little bit. And so there's a little bit of a thing there that's pretty unsatisfying because it's delayed and you don't know when it's going to come together.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think
sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say part of what I'm hearing is like a lot of it, and I'm biased to always go this way, is like acceptance of like accepting the messy, accepting that there's growing pains, accepting that it's a process, and just like allowing things to become versus needing to be at the destination right away. As we were talking, I was having like flashbacks, seems like the wrong word, reminders of like our practice class and like what it was like to be in that class. And like one thing I wanted to ask was like, I felt like, at least I love all my professors and learned a lot in every class. Let me start with that. I felt like your class in particular was the one that made me rethink my practice or reflect on my practice the most, where, you know, going into that class, I was like, this Carl Rogers stuff seems like a whole lot of nothing. And then we had a case study and I was like, all right, maybe there's something there. So I guess like for you, like, as you think about students entering, exiting your classes, like what's like the thing you hope they leave with, or in terms of how they view or apply their practice after taking you as a professor?
I think there's a lot of outcomes I'd be really thrilled with, including that one. Like, like, no, I mean, really, like, I think that I hope that people can be reflective about what they're doing. And I hope that people can find some things they resonate with along the way. Because you're not like in the practice class, especially as we do sort of like survey of lots of theories, like not everyone is going to feel the same and not everyone is going to get you excited. But I hope that there's a couple that do. I hope there's something about what we talk about that's going to make you think like, oh, I want to save this because I want to come back to this when I'm doing the work, and I want this to be a part of how I'm gonna like this. I want this to be a part of my clinical life, so to speak. And I mean, so I guess that's one thing. I hope that I hope that people go out wanting to ask more questions and wanting to question things. Like I think we should question what we're doing. I think that clinical practice, I don't know, I think it's really easy to just walk in and do what your supervisor's doing. And in the beginning, that's what you have to do because you do. And I think that's okay. But then I also think that you have to say, well, wait a minute. Do I really think that this holds any water? Do I really think that this is how we should be doing this work? Because you got to be, yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that question either.
That resonates though, and kind of what I hear you saying is like combines with something I've been thinking, which is like you can't. It's really challenging to do both at the same time. Build a plane while you fly it. Like like sit in, accept other people's conclusions about how to operate with a client or that these things work, and just it's the first part of it being mimicry and sort of, aping what you are taught, and you get the muscle memory of it, and then that gives you the lived experience to step back afterwards and say, okay, what am I doing? How did that go? What, do I think that this endeavor in the way I'm partaking in it is worthwhile? And if I think it's working, why and in what way?
Yeah. And I think that's part of why I think it's important that we do engage with the research, because I do think that there are some things that we can learn and say, like, look, can you find a reasonable set of evidence that this intervention is good for this client at this time for this problem? And if you can't, then maybe you shouldn't be using that intervention. The other thing I was going to say is that as you were talking, I was thinking about like the number of supervisors that I had, and I was thinking about how they all sort of helped inform my approach to things. And like I had some that were very concrete, like here's what we're doing, here's the job, here's what you need to do next. And that's like helpful, that's important. I did a lot of crisis work in my first year out of as an MSW. And so that's like more prescriptive in a lot of ways. And then some supervisors who were much more process, much more Henry. Henry was so like, he was all about Carl Jung and containment and attunement and anything related to that. And he drove me bonkers. So I was like, Henry, I don't know what to do. He goes, yeah, you're containing. That's what you need to do right now. I'm like, Henry, that is not a thing to do. Like, what am I supposed to, this kid is running around Orangewood. He's about to throw chairs through the windows. Containment. He's like, yeah, you're containing. You're doing a good job. Oh my God. But I think, I guess, I don't know how to, like, this isn't fair, right? Because I had like all these people who were like really different. And then I had some really stellar supervisors who were super insightful. And so I don't know, like, that's such a critical thing and so hard to have control over. So I think I got lucky in that sense. And then, yeah.
We're sort of winding down here towards the end. Something I'm curious about, maybe in a little bit of a different direction, is there anyone in your life, personal or professional, or like figures whose work you've engaged a lot with, that are either right now or in general serving as an inspiration for you? Like this is sort of this person, how they are as a human, or how they write, something about them is like a goalpost for me. Who do you aspire to be like, I guess, is the short way to ask that question. In 5 minutes. No.
Man, I feel like I have a lot of those people. Speaking of imposter syndrome, Vale, I don't know what that means. Like, I think my yeah, I mean, I have colleagues who crank out research, and so that's inspiring. I continue to really like and identify with and collaborate with my PhD advisor. And so I think that continues to be a big source of work that I'm doing, and I like it. so like, let's put him on the list. I really I'm like Greg Boyle is high on the list right now for me because of how he talks about people and how we are with people and what he says about kinship. And I don't always understand exactly what he means by kinship. But when he talks about it in the sense of like a non-judgmental space for redemption, I think that's amazing. And that seems to be like a lot what people need right now. So I wish there was just a lot more Greg Boyle wandering around, meeting people in the margins and bringing giant homies with him to create opportunities for kinship. Yeah. I really like Wynton Marsalis. He's a trumpet player. And so I listen to him a lot. I also, yeah. I also really like, so yeah, there's like a lot of music people that are kind of on that list for me that tend to like really inspire and sort of make me think about how I can, I don't know what the answer to that part of it is, but it continues to be something that's very much on my list of like, who do I want to be like? I want to be like some of these people that are making music. So I don't know if that means that I will just have to keep playing in university band tomorrow night concert, or if there's like, some other sort of, I don't know, metaphorical parallel to derive from that.
The note of inspiration and taking like a slight turn, I was wondering, like, I think we all have our phases of curiosities. Like this whole year has been like acceptance commitment therapy era for me, like me really diving into that intervention and exploring it. So I'm wondering for you, like what right now is like piquing your curiosity, or like what are you currently learning more about, exploring? So much.
It's interesting, right? Because this is a year where I feel like I have spent a lot of time not doing that. I've spent a lot of time doing other things that have just been like constantly demanding attention. Some of it's department business and some of it's other stuff. And so it's like, I feel like I'm in a kind of a year, or an academic year, I guess, of like a little bit of a dry spell. That sounds bad to say that. In terms of like what I'm really excited about learning about next. So like I've had these like moments where I've been able to have conversations with people, and like I was talking to my advisor Ron at the social work conference in January. We were talking some about the principal thing and talking about some other projects that were like super interesting to talk about. But I feel like, and this maybe goes back to, I think, conversations that I've maybe had pieces of with some of you already, like this idea of time and pace, and like I need time to think, and I need time to read, and it's hard to find it. And like I'm always like, oh, I'll read that when I get home. I'm not going to read that when I get home. That's ridiculous. I'm tired when I get home. Yeah. So I'm on sabbatical next spring. So I'm back in the fall. And then I'll be on sabbatical. And so I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited to try to get some like research routines reestablished, and get those going in maybe a different way, having the opportunity to do that, having the opportunity to really like turn the schedule upside down, and rethink all that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'll follow up after your sabbatical, see if you have a different answer.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think some of the things that like come across, I mean, like, well, never mind. I don't even know the end of that sentence.
Well, before, I think, Chris, you're about to wrap up our conversation, if I'm not.
I had one final question.
Oh, good. Go for it.
Unless anyone else has a different question. But I guess because we're doing this, May is in a day or two. I always forget which month has 34 days or 31 days. And we'll be posting this as we approach graduations. I guess maybe speaking to Gavin and myself or the graduating class in general, like thinking back to like this point of your career, new MSW, like what are some words of advice, things you wish you learned earlier or not the hard way that you would want to impart on the graduating class?
You know, you'll all figure it out. I think paying attention to the details of the job is important and making sure that you get what you need out of it. And I know that that requires choices, and I know that that's like not assured. But like, if you want to be clinical, pay attention to supervision, and pay attention to how people are going to do that. If you work at fill in the blank agency, like what's their system for that? And because that's what you're going to do, right? You're going to start working, and you have to learn a new place unless you get a job where your internship is, and then you know the place, but you're going to shift the work. And so like, how do you start you're done with school, you don't have to do that anymore, but you're still, like you're still having, you still have supervision, you're still kind of learning a lot. So pay attention to that. I think continue to like pay attention to how you want to practice and be reflective about that, and carve time to think about who you want to be. And like, I think you got to keep track, like use those session rating scales from Scott Miller, or use something to get feedback so that you can continue to shape yourself as a therapist and your ability to connect with and help others. Maybe I would throw that out. Also, like, your first job doesn't have to be your last job. Social workers migrate. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate you agreeing to let us interview you. I'm going to pause the recording or stop the recording.